This is Jason Profetto. I am the chair of clinical skills and the OSCE director. This is the MF1 clinical skills orientation video for the preceptors. If you are listening to this, it's because you've been chosen, and congratulations for or to be a clinical skills preceptor for the Medical Foundation 1 for the class of 2023. We are very, very excited to have you, and we really appreciate everyone that's applied and has committed the time, energy, and effort to actually put together a clinical skills curriculum and teach it with us. So we are going to be doing a bit of an orientation today. I've pulled up my med portal just because normally I also have a slide deck, but I thought it'd be a little bit easier just to go through the clinical skills guide and bring you through a couple of specific details that's going to be very helpful for you today. This clinical skills orientation necessarily has to look very different than the past because everything's virtual now. So in the past, clinical skills was heavily focused on in-person delivery. We would meet on a regular basis with students. They would practice clinical skills in person. But MF1, the first medical foundation, the first starting unit for our incoming medical students who just started last week, is going to be delivered completely online. This is completely virtual. So there's a couple of key things that I really wanted to highlight today. You're going to be receiving, as a co-resident preceptor for clinical skills, a bunch of information from our administration. So things like frequently asked questions about clinical skills, how to structure your online virtual clinical skills, some tips and fact sheets from our actual clinical skills team with input from students as well that have had some virtual teaching from the upper year class. When you look at our pre-clerkship curriculum. So McMaster is divided into pre-clerkship and clerkship, and this is for those who are not familiar with the McMaster structure. Pre-clerkship is everything before the clinical rotations, as you probably know, and clerkship is the clinical rotations. Pre-clerkship, what we have is 5 different medical foundations, MF1, 2, 3, 4, and whereas we used to have MF5, we now call it the Integration Foundation. And you can see that in this right upper corner here. So MFs 1, 2, 3, 4, and the Integration Foundation. We're going to be focusing on Medical Foundation 1, which has 3 subunits: the Introduction to Medicine, Respirology, and Cardiology. Clinical skills itself is 10 weeks, but the actual medical foundation is 11 weeks. The very first week, which we would consider a little bit more of an orientation and welcome week, doesn't actually have clinical skills. So you are going to be teaching 10 weeks of clinical skills, and we're going to show you exactly what's expected to be taught. So if you actually log into Med Portal, and everyone here should have a Med Portal login, you'll actually see my picture. That's my picture from about 15 years ago when I entered medical school in McMaster. The 3 subunits are all included for what you're going to be teaching in clinical skills. The current subunit is Introduction to Medicine. You see weeks 1, 2, and 3. Respirology will have the 4 weeks, and cardiology will have 4 weeks as well, for a total of 11 weeks, right? 8 plus 3. Introduction to Medicine, week 1 is already completed. And what you'll see here is these are the different parts of the actual curriculum that are expected. So tutorials is a major mandatory part. And what will happen is there are tutorials twice per week, usually Monday, Thursday, or Tuesday, Friday. It's mandatory. The other big thing is, I guess it doesn't really show it here, is the professionalism. Well, we call it professionalism sessions, but professional competencies. Every Tuesday morning between 9 and 12, there's a professional competencies tutorial, and that's also considered mandatory. The third part of this triad is what we call clinical skills. So clinical skills is another major part of the pre-clerkship. So tutorials, we'll just go back up here. This is where the bulk of the content is learned. So this is where students, for example, learn about the anatomy of the heart, the anatomy of the lungs, pathophysiology, that sort of thing. Professional competencies is where we discuss ethics, professionalism, different pieces of almost like philosophical aspects of medicine communication. It's a very deep and rich part of our curriculum. And then clinical skills is the third major part, and this is where we focus largely on learning how to take histories and physical examinations, right? You'll see there's a bunch of different things here, like there's anatomy, which is a big part of our curriculum, different information sessions, but this is more of a welcome section because it's the introduction to medicine, archived lectures, and we also have active learning sessions, which are almost like lectures, but a little bit more interactive and meant to be a much higher yield type session. So when you go to clinical skills is something that's traditionally taught once per week. Each MF will have clinical skills that's taught once per week. What we do at McMaster is we break the students into groups. There's going to be two major types of groups. The clinical skills and tutorial groups are the same group, commonly referred to as the tutorial group. The second group is the professional competency group. But this is a group that's created, so this is usually around 10 students. It starts in September and it continues right till the end of the pre-clerkship. That group does not change. The tutorial group is anywhere between 6 and 8 students, and it will change with every MF. That is the same group that's going to be the clinical skills group. Clinical skills is taught once per week. It's generally in the late afternoon or the evening. It can be anywhere from Monday to Thursday, and rarely it's done on a Friday night or on a weekend. That's usually not the case. Each group for clinical skills will have 2 preceptors. We call these the co-resident preceptors. So the co-resident preceptors that is information that you have received. You will see who your partner is that you're going to be teaching with. You'll see who the tutor is that's going to be teaching the tutorial part. And then you'll get a list of the names of the students in your actual clinical skills or tutorial group. Now, the big thing though is clinical skills is a focus on teaching the history and physical exam. And that is such an important point, I have to repeat it. And I don't mean to condescend, but it's actually very important to emphasize this. It is the focus on teaching clinical skills, history, and physical examination. The reason why I say that is because this is one of the major parts of the pre-clerkship where students actually get a lot of practice almost becoming an actual doctor, speaking to people, speaking to standardized patients, practicing actual physical exams, and so on and so forth. Now, I'll click here. So this is the actual clinical skills guide. It is a very large guide. The guide itself has had multiple iterations over the past few years. In 2017, we did a copyright, and this is McMaster's official manual. This is the manual only for MF1. However, there's an entire manual for MFs 1, 2, 3, 4, and also the Integration Foundation. This manual itself is about 100 pages, but the entire manual is closer to 400. We are doing this virtually, which is going to significantly impact the way we're delivering clinical skills, which is okay. And we've been dealing with it over the last 4 or 5 months now, but this is something that we really have to highlight. If you go down in these different pieces, there's a lot of introductory material just to get you better acquainted with what clinical skills is, the AFMC Clinical Skills National document, which is sort of a standard that's held Canada-wide, an introduction to the concepts around social justice and diversity and inclusion. These are our efforts to make clinical skills as inclusive and diverse as possible, especially for equity-seeking groups. Just acknowledgement of the different editors over the years, including student bodies and other doctors. And then this table of contents here is the bulk of what you know. For me personally, I always come back to this page. This tells us 2 things. When you look at the MF1 Clinical Skills Overview, this will tell you exactly what's going to be taught, what is expected to be taught in MF1. The general medical history, pieces about how communication occurs between patient and physician, understanding communication, but also understanding structurally vulnerable populations as well. And this is a bit of our flavor of inclusivity and diversity. There's a section on vital signs, which is done in MF1. And then there's the respiratory exam, the cardiac exam, the head and neck exam, and pieces of the peripheral vascular exam as well. The head and neck exam, it should be noted that this is without the lymph nodes because we do a bit more of a specific lymph node exam later on. The weekly sessions, which is the second part here, is literally your week-to-week guide. What is actually happening in each and every week? What is the agenda? Whereas this, the clinical skills overview, is the content that needs to be taught across MF1. This is the actual agenda. And then down here is just an appendix. So this is some interesting information that you will find in the appendices, which is towards the end of this actual guide. If you go to the actual weekly skill sessions, you'll see all the different topics and you'll see pro-comp connections. When you look at the actual topics, what you're going to notice in MF1, there's a lot of introductory material. Introduction to history taking, introduction to the effective physician-patient communication, history practice week, and an integration case. And these first 3 weeks are meant to really bring the student into the realm of clinical skills. This is what we do. This is how you speak. These are the different rules of engagement. I don't mean to sound so like paternalistic in this, but really giving students an introduction to what the expectations are. This is also going to be complementing what's happening in the tutorials and also what's happening in professional competencies, also known as pro-comp. You'll see there's a lot of direct connections that we make. We call them pro-comp connections. And what happens is we encourage groups and preceptors that when they're discussing different parts of clinical skills, that they bring up these integrative moments that actually connect intentionally with other parts of the curriculum. A really good one is just for an example, here we have patients of varying body habitus, occupational health, and poverty. So a really good example is people with disabilities. So if we're talking about how you would position someone to do the abdominal exam, and you were to ask them to lay on an exam bed, an individual that is in a wheelchair because they have multiple sclerosis or advanced Parkinson's disease will not be able to lay on that bed in a safe way. So how do you adjust the situation so that you are inclusive of individuals that have a disability? Or, for example, individuals that have a hearing impairment or are deaf, or individuals that have visual impairments or may be blind. So it's more to think about diversity and inclusivity within clinical skills. If you click any of these, you'll get a hyperlink and it'll bring you to the actual session. So the MF1 Session 1 Guide, Introduction to History Taking. It'll give you an actual global objective to demonstrate what is expected, but then also it'll give you the agenda, exactly what's going to be happening. And then you'll see, we always encourage people to have a bit of a brief and debriefing at the start and the end. What is going well? What happened? What can we improve on? And you'll see that where the first session's not so thick or dense in terms of content, there are a lot more things happening in the subsequent sessions. But you'll see again exactly what is expected. The pro-comp connections will come in an orange tone, and there's a lot of good content here. I'm not going to go through it all. You'll see we include a lot of references as well in case there's interest in additional learning. And you'll see things like this, docs, right? So the direct observation of clinical skills. These are checklists that you can actually use. And often it's very helpful. These aren't mandatory, but these are very helpful for students to use to get feedback and observation from, ideally, preceptors, but even sometimes with other students, right? So when you go back to the introduction, you'll see that we do things in a specific way. So we have some introductory material here. Then we teach the vital signs. Then we teach the respiratory exam, followed by a week of practice of the respiratory exam. Then we take the cardiac exam, followed by a week of practice for the cardiac exam, and then the head and neck with a week of practice for the head and neck exam. So while you're going to be doing a lot of teaching and practice, we, the program, are going to set up virtual sessions for standardized patient interaction. And you'll get a copy of all of this information. So during these practice weeks, you'll actually get standardized patients that you can practice with. Now, there's going to be obvious limitations as it pertains to the physical examination. And this is something that we're asking a lot of people to be as creative as possible. There's examples like when you're doing the cardiac exam or the respiratory exam, all the students who are participating in your tutorial group on Zoom or Simulation IQ or whatever virtual platform you're using can put a pillow in a chair, and they can go through the motions and talk about landmarks. For people that actually have other humans in their home that are accessible and available to them, you can use that. You can do different videos. There's a lot of different ways to do it, but we're asking people to be as creative as possible and also as appropriate as possible, right? So the content is here. The agenda is here. The content is here. You're going to be getting standardized patients assigned to you for certain weeks so that you can practice. You will be assigned schedules as well that you can work around and be flexible with, because these things are going to be virtual and they're going to be scheduled. And you're going to be teaching a group of students in the tutorial group with a co-resident preceptor. What we always encourage is to speak to your co-resident preceptor, see how things work. You can switch, you can each do a week. Usually the best scenario ends up being if both preceptors can attend each week, split the group up into smaller groups, and have a little bit more opportunity for observation and feedback. Clinical skills is something that we really try to enforce as much practice and observation as possible. You want students to get a lot of feedback. You want to give them constant ideas, constant tips. And then when it comes to evaluations, there's going to be a mid-unit evaluation and a final evaluation. And these are going to be emailed to the preceptors via MedSys. But evaluations should never actually come as surprises. This is information that the students should generally be exposed to week. There's going to be a lot of learning and new stuff as it pertains to the virtual environment. Where, as I said before, you're going to receive a bunch of tip sheets of how to handle the virtual environment, how to teach best on the virtual environment. This is not going to be a perfect delivery. We're doing our very best. We've made tremendous gains in terms of virtual delivery. We did a full 10-station OSCE, entirely virtual for 200 plus students. So there's going to be a lot of opportunity here. Now, what I would encourage you to do is to go through the guide, get used to it, click on the hyperlinks, look at the different things that you can teach and that you can use here, and how you're going to be structuring your sessions. Remember, there's an agenda, so when you go back, where is it here? When you go back, it'll tell you exactly what you need to do in terms of introduction to the cardiac exam, how to set it up. There's a lot of different material here. It's really rich. It's really interactive. And this has been one of the most enjoyable parts of the curriculum year after year after year. Our resident co-preceptors act as very important role models for our students, and that's been well studied and proven. And this is an opportunity where you get to teach. Now, I don't want to bog you down with too much detail right now, and I've changed the orientation a bit because there's a lot of virtual stuff happening. If there's any questions, you can contact me or our clinical skills team. But there's going to be a lot of learning as you go, and I really want everyone to, as much as possible, get used to the actual virtual environment. Be as creative as you can, get feedback throughout the sessions, and continuously communicate with your students. So remember, these are going to be weekly sessions, 2 to 3 hours in length. They're going to be scheduled for you. Certain weeks you're going to be getting standardized patients, and you have this clinical skills guide in MedPortal with all the information that you actually need. I'm going to leave it at that. If you have any other questions, please let us know. Always happy to chat. And again, thank you so much for committing to clinical skills. We really look forward to having you.